So, um, I want you to just imagine for a second taking a submarine down to the absolute bottom of the ocean.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right? You drop past the sunlit zone, you go past the twilight zone, all the way down to the abyssal plain. You're like 4,000 meters deep.
That is incredibly deep.
Yeah, and the pressure down there is crushing. It's about 400 times what we feel up here on the surface. And, the darkness is just absolute. Sunlight hasn't touched this part of the world in millions of years.
Right. It's an incredibly hostile environment, at least by our surface standards. And because there is literally zero sunlight, photosynthesis is completely impossible.
Exactly.
The textbook understanding of Earth's biosphere tells us that any oxygen down there had to be carried by deep ocean currents all the way from the surface, where phytoplankton and plants actually produced it.
Right. That is like the golden rule of biology that we all learn. But a recent study is claiming that golden rule is just broken.
Yeah, completely shattered.
According to some highly controversial measurements, something in that freezing pitch black water is creating oxygen right there on the seafloor. And today we're diving into a full-blown scientific war over this claim.
It really is a war, yeah.
Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this whole thing because we've got a stack of fresh research detailing a massive clash. In July 2024, a team from the University of Bristol published this bombshell paper in Nature Geoscience claiming they've discovered this phenomenon.
Right.
And almost immediately, another group published honestly, a brutal, uncompromising rebuttal in Frontiers, basically calling the original team scientifically illiterate.
They did not hold back. And, it's vital to grasp why this has triggered such an aggressive response from the scientific community.
Why are they so mad?
Well, this isn't just an academic debate about, instrument calibration. If the Bristol study is accurate, it forces us to rewrite our fundamental models of how life on Earth might have actually begun. Plus, it has massive immediate implications for the deep-sea mining industry. We're talking about billions of dollars. And the ecological baseline of the entire ocean floor hanging on whether these oxygen measurements are real or just, a massive error.
Right. Okay, so let's start with the bombshell itself. The Bristol researchers introduced this concept they're calling dark oxygen.
Yeah, dark oxygen.
They claim to have found oxygen being produced entirely independent of solar energy. And the mechanism they proposed is wild. They pointed to these things called polymetallic nodules.
Right, which are fascinating in their own right.
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar, these are basically potato-sized concretions of manganese, iron, nickel, and cobalt. And they just litter the seafloor in places like the Clarion-Clipperton Zone.
Exactly. They grow incredibly slowly over millions of years around a tiny core like a shark tooth or a shell fragment.
And the Bristol team hypothesized that these deep-sea metal potatoes are acting like natural batteries, right? Generating an electric current right there in the salt water.
Yeah, the underlying chemistry they're proposing relies on a pretty well-understood process called electrolysis.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in a lab setting, if you want to split a water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen gases, you just pass a strong enough electric current through it to break the covalent bonds.
You just shock the water.
Exactly, you shock it. And the minimum voltage required to split water is about 1.23 volts. Now, the Bristol team, they measured the electrical potential on the surface of these individual nodules, and they actually found readings up to 0.95 volts.
Which is close, but not quite 1.23.
Right. But their hypothesis is that when these nodules are, clustered together on the seafloor, they act like batteries wired in series.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so they push that total voltage past the 1.23 volt threshold, naturally splitting the seawater and releasing this dark oxygen.
Okay, so it's basically the world's most extreme lemon battery.
Yeah, exactly.
But using rare earth metals and 4,000 meters of ocean pressure. That's insane. And the implications are staggering. Let's unpack this for a second. If we have geological formations spontaneously generating oxygen without a single biological organism involved, that throws a massive wrench into astrobiology, right?
Absolutely.
Because we've always assumed early Earth was an entirely anoxic, completely oxygen-free environment until cyanobacteria evolved and started doing the whole photosynthesis thing.
Right, that's the standard timeline.
But if rocks can just make oxygen on their own, does that mean early life actually had access to oxygen way earlier than we thought?
Exactly. It completely alters the chemical constraints we use to model the emergence of complex life. If dark oxygen is real, it means we might need to look for life on other planets or, under the ice of moons like Europa or Enceladus. through an entirely different lens.
Because oxygen might just be there already.
Precisely. And on a more immediate level, it completely upends deep-sea mining. You have these mining consortia that are desperately trying to dredge up these exact polymetallic nodules.
Right, because they're packed with all the cobalt and nickel we need for,
Mhm.
like, electric vehicle batteries.
Yes, and the mining companies have basically been operating under the assumption that the abyssal plain is just this lifeless desert.
Like, scooping up these rocks won't do much harm because nothing's down there anyway.
Right. The environmental impact assessments are totally built on the premise that these nodules are just inert rocks. But if it turns out these nodules are actively generating the oxygen that supports local deep-sea ecosystems, benthic worms, sponges, microbial mats, then mining them wouldn't just be disturbing the habitat.
It would be unplugging the life support.
Exactly. It would be ripping out the ecosystem's literal life support system. The regulatory hurdles for deep-sea mining would become nearly insurmountable overnight.
Which is exactly why the pushback against this study has been so fierce. I mean, whenever a discovery threatens to rewrite the textbooks and upend a billion-dollar industry at the same time, the scientific community brings out the heavy artillery.
They absolutely do.
And that brings us to the counter-study published in Frontiers. And let's be clear here. The authors of this rebuttal didn't just say the Bristol team, made a math mistake. They declared the dark oxygen theory an outright physical impossibility.
They did. They completely bypassed the biological or geological arguments and went straight for the fundamental laws of physics.
Right, thermodynamics.
Yes. Specifically, the laws of thermodynamics. The Frontiers authors argue that the Bristol team's conclusions describe a process that simply cannot exist in the physical universe as we understand it.
Okay, so let's unpack the physics here.
Yeah.
Because to me, saying a rock acts like a battery sounds plausible enough. I mean, galvanic cells are a real thing, right?
Sure they are.
If you stick two dissimilar metals in a conductive electrolyte like salt water, you get a voltage differential. So why are the critics saying this breaks the laws of thermodynamics?
Because there's a really critical difference between having a surface voltage and having the sustained energy required to continuously drive a chemical reaction.
Oh.
Splitting water molecules, it requires a continuous input of energy, joules of actual work. It's an endothermic reaction. So the critics are pointing out this massive flaw in the energy accounting.
Meaning the math just doesn't add up.
Right. Even if a polymetallic nodule acts like a battery and has enough voltage to split a few water molecules, a battery only holds a finite amount of chemical potential energy.
So it would just run out.
Exactly. Once that chemical energy is spent, the battery is dead. It reaches equilibrium and stops.
Ah, I see. So it's not like a solar panel that's constantly getting fresh energy beamed down from the sun. It's a closed system.
Exactly. For these nodules to continuously produce oxygen over millions of years, like the original study implies, some external energy source has to be constantly recharging the battery.
And there's nothing down there to recharge it.
Right. Sitting in the freezing, pitch-black, abyssal plain, there is no massive external energy source. There's no sunlight, and in the specific areas they were measuring, there's no hydrothermal vent activity to provide geothermal energy either.
Man. The Frontiers paper included this absolutely brutal quote from an electrochemist named Angel Cuesta-Ciscar. He said the Bristol team's claim is, quote, equivalent to saying that energy is created from nothing.
Yeah, that is the ultimate insult in physics.
I mean, it's like finding a wound-up grandfather clock in a sealed, abandoned tomb. Sure, it's ticking, but who the hell is winding it, right? The math says the clock should have stopped millions of years ago. You can't have a continuous flow of oxygen without a continuous input of energy.
That is a perfect analogy. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The Bristol model literally requires us to believe these rocks are essentially perpetual motion machines.
Wow.
Yeah, continuously doing the heavy lifting of breaking atomic bonds without drawing power from anywhere. The critics are arguing that the Bristol team just mistook a transient, tiny surface voltage for a sustained, massive thermodynamic engine.
Okay, but let me push back on this for a second, just to play devil's advocate. Are the Frontiers scientists maybe being a bit too rigid here?
How do you mean?
Well, we've seen moments in the history of science where the old guard refuses to accept a paradigm shift because they're overly attached to their established models.
That's true.
Is it possible there's some bizarre quantum effect or like an undiscovered radiolytic process happening inside these specific rocks that the classical thermodynamic models just aren't capturing?
It's a fair question, and honestly, science should always leave the door open for unknown variables. But you have to weigh the probabilities here. Radiolysis, which is where radiation splits water, does happen in nature.
All right.
But the radioactive decay in these specific nodules is orders of magnitude too low to account for the massive oxygen spikes the Bristol team actually recorded.
Because it's a math problem again.
Yeah. The Frontiers team is basically insisting that we shouldn't abandon the foundational laws of energy conservation just yet, especially when there's a much more likely explanation: human error.
Which is the perfect pivot. If the theoretical physics absolutely don't add up, you have to look at the practical execution of the study. Like, how did the Bristol team actually get these numbers?
Right, because they weren't in a pristine lab.
Exactly. They didn't just scoop up rocks and put them in a beaker. They were measuring this stuff in situ, 4 miles underwater. And this leads us directly to the critiques raised by researcher Anders Tengberg regarding the specific physical devices used to take these measurements.
Right, so to measure oxygen production on the seafloor, scientists use these devices called benthic landers.
Okay.
Essentially, they drop these large robotic frames all the way down to the bottom. The lander then drives a sealed chamber, think of it like a heavy, upside-down bucket, into the sediment.
Trapping whatever's underneath it.
Yes, trapping a volume of seawater and a patch of the seafloor. Then sensors inside that sealed chamber measure how the oxygen concentration changes over several days.
And Tengberg points out a massive mechanical flaw with how this was actually done. Let's call it the bubble problem. Tengberg argues that the landers the Bristol team used were not properly ventilated during their descent from the surface ship.
And this is just a devastatingly simple critique. The ocean surface is completely saturated with oxygen.
Naturally.
The equipment used to build these landers, especially the syntactic foam they use for buoyancy, and just the various nooks and crannies of the frame, can easily trap microscopic bubbles of surface air.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and as the lander descends, the pressure increases enormously, right, which compresses those bubbles.
So by the time it hits the bottom, those trapped microbubbles are still clinging to the equipment inside that sealed chamber. And under 400 atmospheres of pressure, gas behaves really strangely.
Exactly. Once the chamber seals into the sediment, those trapped surface bubbles slowly begin to dissolve into the trapped seawater.
Wait, so?
Yeah. To the oxygen sensors inside the chamber, this looks exactly like a steady, gradual increase in oxygen concentration over time.
So that the sensors register a spike.
And the researchers interpret it as dark oxygen being actively produced by the nodules, but in reality, it's just a leftover breath of surface air slowly outgassing from their own equipment.
Wow. I mean, it's an incredibly practical explanation that completely bypasses the need for, like, magical battery rocks.
Oh.
But there's a second critique in the methodology that feels even more fatal to the dark oxygen theory: the artifact problem.
Yes, and from a data analysis perspective, this is definitely the most damning piece of evidence Tengberg's camp presents.
Let's hear it.
So benthic lander experiments usually run control tests. You test a patch of seafloor with the polymetallic nodules, and then you move the lander and test a patch of bare sediment without any nodules.
Just to compare the baseline, right? Like, see what the microbes in the mud are doing.
Exactly.
And what do they find in the control tests?
Well, according to the subsequent analyses of the data, significant oxygen spikes were detected even in the control chambers where the polymetallic nodules were completely absent.
Okay, that is wild. It's like testing a new military radar system to detect stealth jets, getting a massive blip on the screen, and then realizing the blip is still there when you point the radar at a completely blank wall.
Perfect way to put it.
Right. It's an artifact of the machine, not a stealth jet. If you're finding oxygen generation in the mud where there are absolutely no battery rocks present, then the rocks definitely aren't the things making the oxygen.
That is the textbook definition of an experimental artifact. If the supposed source of the phenomenon, the nodules, is removed, and the phenomenon still occurs,
The theory is dead.
the hypothesis that the nodules are causing it collapses entirely. It heavily reinforces Tengberg's argument that the oxygen readings were just a byproduct of the experimental setup, like the trapped air or sensor drift, rather than a genuine feature of the deep sea environment.
So let's look at the battlefield right now. On one side, we have theoretical physicists screaming that the study breaks the unbreakable laws of thermodynamics.
Right.
On the other side, we have experimental researchers pointing out that the sensors probably just brought their own oxygen from the surface, and that the supposed phenomenon happens even when the nodules aren't there. With the physics and the methodology under this kind of coordinated heavy fire, you'd think the original Bristol team would issue a retraction, pack up, and go home.
You would think so.
But they aren't doing that at all, are they?
No, not at all. They're actually digging their heels in. Andrew Sweetman, who's the lead researcher of the Bristol study, and his entire team are holding the line. Yeah, they are maintaining their position that dark oxygen is a real, measurable phenomenon, despite all the severe criticism from the broader scientific community.
And they aren't just fighting this in the letters section of academic journals either. Sweetman asserts that they actually have additional unreleased evidence that is currently under peer review right now. Plus, they're actively preparing a brand new expedition. They're going back down to the Clarion-Clipperton Zone.
Which, frankly, is the correct response when your methodology is questioned.
Yeah.
In science, you don't win a debate with rhetoric, you win it with tighter data. If someone says your equipment was flawed, you build better equipment and you do it again.
But this time, they aren't just dropping passive landers. They're sending highly advanced underwater robots, ROVs, or remotely operated vehicles.
Right.
How exactly does an ROV solve the methodological problems the critics pointed out? Like, if the issue is trapped bubbles and false positives, how do robots prove the haters wrong?
The shift from passive benthic landers to active ROVs is a massive upgrade in experimental control. A passive lander is dropped blindly, right? It sinks, it hits the mud, and you just hope for the best.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, you can't see if air is trapped, and you can't guarantee a perfect seal. An ROV changes everything. A pilot on the surface ship is watching through high-definition cameras in real time.
Okay, so they can see everything.
Exactly. They can use the ROV's robotic arms to gently and precisely place the incubation chambers right over the nodules.
So they can visually confirm that there are no trapped bubbles.
More than that, actually. They can actively flush the chambers with deep-sea water multiple times before sealing them, completely eliminating the trapped bubble hypothesis altogether.
Well, that's smart.
Furthermore, an ROV allows for highly precise, targeted control group tests. They can test a cluster of nodules, physically pick those exact nodules up, move them 10 feet away, and then test that exact same patch of now empty sediment.
Wow, okay.
This level of active in situ manipulation will definitively address those experimental artifact claims.
But if the thermodynamics are fundamentally mathematically impossible, as the Frontiers paper claims, why even fund another expedition? Aren't they just spending millions of dollars to chase a ghost?
That's the tension that makes this whole thing so fascinating. From a strict physics standpoint, yes, it seems highly improbable. But anomalies in data are the lifeblood of discovery.
That makes sense.
Even if the dark oxygen turns out to be an incredibly complex instrument error or like an unknown biological process completely unrelated to the rocks, identifying exactly what caused that massive chemical spike is valuable science.
Because we still learn something.
Exactly. And of course, there's that infinitesimal chance that they have stumbled onto a novel catalytic process that our current thermodynamic models just haven't accounted for in extreme high-pressure, low-temperature environments.
It really is the ultimate put-up-or-shut-up moment for the Bristol team. There's literally no middle ground left. When those ROVs come back up, it's either going to result in undeniable proof of a phenomenon that forces us to rewrite modern physics and totally halt deep-sea mining.
Or it's going to be a very public, very expensive lesson in experimental error. And, this whole saga perfectly illustrates how science actually works in practice. It's rarely a sterile process of politely adding established facts to a textbook.
Halfway now.
Real science is a messy, high-stakes, aggressive debate. It's a war of ideas where our understanding of reality is constantly being challenged, broken down, and rigorously tested through peer review. When a new claim is made, the community's job isn't to applaud.
It's to try and tear that claim apart to see if it survives.
Precisely.
A scientific war waged 4 miles down at the bottom of the ocean. Really doesn't get much cooler than that. We started the deep dive looking at a mysterious black rock, supposedly generating oxygen in the pitch black, and we ended up in a bare-knuckle brawl over the laws of thermodynamics, the origin of life, and the mechanics of trapped microbubbles.
It's a wild ride.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Let's imagine that Sweetman's underwater robots go down into the abyss, and despite all the skepticism, they do somehow prove it.
Okay.
They eliminate all the bubbles, they run perfect controls, and they prove the existence of dark oxygen beyond a shadow of a doubt. Does that mean the established laws of physics we rely on every single day are fundamentally flawed? Or Are our models simply incomplete when it comes to the most extreme, unexplored alien environments right here on our own planet?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Think back to that clean, comforting equation of a sunlit plant making oxygen. Maybe reality is just waiting to show us how much messier, stranger, and more beautiful it really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.